Greetings and welcome to this Huntington Learning Center webinar, Preventing Summer Learning Loss in Students with ADHD. Our presentation tonight comes from Dr. Mary Rooney, and we're very thrilled to have her with us again. I'm Michael Hackmer, I'll be your moderator for today's event, and on behalf of Huntington Learning Center and Dr. Rooney, I want to say thank you so much for making time to join us this evening. Really appreciate you making the time. We know there's a lot going on. If you've attended webinars with us in the past, you'll know that we use GoToWebinar. And on your screen, you should see it'll either be expanded or it should be just a little bar on the side of your screen that you can click to open and expand out is the GoToWebinar control panel. This is where you can ask questions or engage in chat with me if you have any kind of technical issues or anything like that during the course of the event. We will do the Q&A at the end, but we do ask that if you got a question that comes to you during the course of the presentation, get into the queue right away. We don't want you to hold on to it and then you forget it. Let's make sure you get that question loaded in right away. Now, we may not get to everybody's question, but we are going to keep track of the questions and who asked them, so that way we can follow up after the webinar. We're also recording today's event. This is going to be available on huntingtonhelps.com/webinars. It usually takes us a couple of days to send out the recording via email, the link to the on-demand, I should say. But if for whatever reason you don't see that email in your inbox, just go back to the Huntington Helps website and look under resources for the webinars. That's where we've got all of our upcoming and past events. Now, before I introduce Dr. Rooney, I do want to talk a little bit about Huntington Learning Center. If you're familiar with Huntington, Huntington is a proven tutoring and test prep organization that serves students in grades K through 12. And we've been around for a little over 40 years. And there are really three, I think, key things that differentiate Huntington from other tutoring and test prep centers or going out and hiring a tutor for your student learner. And here's what they are. One, everybody that works with Huntington is a highly trained and certified tutor. In fact, the Huntington training program has won awards over the course of the years for their work in training and certifying their tutors. It's really important to us that every person who interfaces with your child, your student learner, has the skills and the expertise to be able to make sure that they can make improvements. The other important differentiator, I think, is the fact that Huntington's accredited. And as your child goes through their academic journey and they're seeking degrees or certifications, many institutions that are issuing those degrees and certifications will be accredited by Middle States Association of Colleges and Schools, and that is the same accreditation that Huntington has. And last but certainly not least, in fact, I think this is probably one of the best differentiators that Huntington has to offer, is that all of our programs are individualized. They're personalized to the student. Now, granted, lots of students have very similar challenges, right? Either in math and study skills, test taking, and things like that. But at the end of the day, every child has strengths and weaknesses that are a little bit different, and we want to make sure that we address those specific strengths and weaknesses in your child. So we get students in, we do an assessment. If we're doing test prep, we'll do practice tests, really, to get a better idea of what it is we need to focus on. And the results really do speak for themselves. So when we look at reading and we look at math skills, in just about 3 months, the average improvement is 2 grade levels, which is really significant. And then if you're looking at college entrance exams like the SAT or the ACT, on the SAT, it's typically an increase of 229 points, which is significant, in the ACT, which is 5.4 points. And of course, at Huntington, we offer in-person and online tutoring. So now it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Mary Rooney, who is a PhD and ABPP, as a licensed clinical psychologist. She's board certified in child and adolescent psychology. She is a nationally recognized ADHD expert. In fact, she is a consultant and participates with Huntington on our ADHD blog, which I invite you to check out at huntingtonhelps.com. She's worked over many years closely with parents and teachers to really create that supportive and structured home and school environment to help enable children and adolescents to reach their full potential. So we're really thrilled to have Dr. Rooney's insights. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to Dr. Rooney. Dr. Rooney?
Great. Thank you, Michael. Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm so glad that you could join us today for this webinar on an important and very timely topic. And I hope you'll leave today with some practical and realistic strategies that you can start using right away or in the coming months. So here's what we'll cover today. We'll talk about why summer learning loss is why it matters, why it's a problem, and why kids with ADHD are especially vulnerable. We'll talk about some practical tools you can use this summer and go through a couple of real-life case examples to sort of solidify and give you some ideas as to how these things can all fit together that we're talking about. And then finally, some key takeaways to keep in mind. So let's start with a big picture look at what summer learning loss is actually like. So summer learning loss, or the summer slide, right, refers to the fact that studies show most students will lose about 1 to 2 months of academic learning over the summer. And most of these studies have focused on math, where they've shown particularly strong learning loss, and sometimes in reading as well. And students with ADHD are at higher risk for more substantial learning loss due to greater regression in executive functioning skills like organization, attention, and memory, more pronounced learning loss in reading comprehension and written expression particularly, and this is especially true if they also have a learning disorder. And they in general have a harder time restarting routines in the fall when they've been in a situation where there are very few routines and things are generally quite loose. So all of this has pretty significant consequences for them, contributes to academic setbacks, decreased confidence, and increased anxiety at the start of the new school year. So the good thing is there are things that you can do as parents that can make a big difference in preventing or at least mitigating a lot of learning loss that happens over the summer. And we're going to talk about kind of 3 groups of things that you can do. These are related to maintaining routine and structure, making learning a part of daily life and engaging consistent academic practice, and using clear goals and rewards to support this, and then striking a balance between academics and downtime as part of maintaining motivation and really being able to keep up your plan throughout the whole summer. So let's break each of these down, starting with routines. So as many of you know, if you've got kids at home with ADHD, they tend to thrive on predictability, right? Structured routines are really crucial for kids with ADHD, and this doesn't change during the summer. So during the summer, you can have kind of an inclination to want to let some of those routines go. You may feel a bit burned out from the school year and having to keep up with things. But having some kind of a routine, it doesn't have to be the same or as intense as during the school year, but some kind of routine can go a long way, because routines in general for kids with ADHD and their parents reduce anxiety and stress, support their executive functioning, allowing them to pay better attention, be more organized, just kind of be more on top of things generally. They decrease resistance to things that they are asked to do that they might not want to do, like some of these academic assignments and exercises that you're asking them to do over the summer. They increase consistency, so they allow you to do what you want to do, or your kids to do what they need to do with more consistency than they would otherwise. And this consistency and decreased resistance and support of executive functioning is really what makes goals you may have for the summer achievable, right? They go from unachievable to achievable when you put these things in place. So when it comes to having successful routines in the summer, it doesn't have to mean that, every hour of every day is blocked out and there's no room for flexibility or downtime. That's actually the opposite of what you want. You want to be able to have routines, but still allow for some flexibility. So the key things to focus on, it starts with consistent wake and sleep times, right? You wake up at the same time, you go to bed at the same time, and trying to not deviate from that as much as possible, even on weekends, is important for a variety of reasons. You want to schedule academic blocks of time in the morning whenever that's possible. So if you have a kid who can get up in the morning and this isn't a big battle and they actually have time available in the morning, use that to schedule the academic time for your child. If that's not their pattern, don't force it. Now's not the time to try to turn them into a morning person or yourself into a morning person. But if you are blessed with that gift, then use it. And then use visual schedules so that your child can see for themselves what the plan is for the day. And I should mention with that, the schedule doesn't need to be the same every day. The sleep and wake time should stay the same, but there can be flexibility on a day-to-day basis with the schedule. And then provide rewards and praise for sticking to the routine. And we'll talk a little bit more about rewards and praise in a future slide. So following up on the routines, consistency is perhaps one of the biggest keys to preventing the summer slide, because you can have all sorts of big plans and you can kind of start out going gangbusters with whatever learning activities and schedule that you want. But if you're not consistent and it's not something you can keep up all summer long, then it's not going to go very well in terms of actually preventing the learning loss and achieving the goals that you want. And so when you're working on consistency, that doesn't mean like long, boring sessions day after day after day. Often it means kind of shorter, more regular academic kind of touch points, and doing things kind of more briefly than you might even think is needed. So sometimes that can even just for younger kids be 15 minutes, right, of reading several times a week is one of the academic activities. Maybe for some kids it's 10 minutes. Like whatever you think your kids can handle, that's what you want to focus on. And repeating the same activities multiple times a week. So, that block of reading time is something that's easily repeated, but you may also be incorporating some like math app activities that your child can, when prompted, start up themselves and do for a set amount of time. Repeating some of those more basic things throughout the week. We'll talk about supplementing with some more interactive and kind of engaging activities, but keeping some of those other things smaller and consistent throughout the week will really help build that repetition. And then incorporating learning into things that your child is doing anyway, right? So if they're helping with chores and there's any way that you can build in some kind of math or reading into that, if they're planning on, you guys are going to be cleaning, you're going to wash the car this weekend, you can have them look up and read about like what's the best way to wash the car, what kind of soap should we use, is it okay to use dish soap, is it not okay to use dish soap, like all these kinds of things. You can say, can you look that up for me and can you tell me about it? And all of a sudden they're reading. So even if it's something anyway, you can kind of pose the question and have them go look stuff up and read it out to you and tell you what they think. Those little things really kind of keep them engaged and just keep them practicing. You can follow a work then play rule. This goes a really long way in boosting consistency. So first you work, then you play, or first you do the things you have to do, then you do the things you want to do. And that really keeps other activities from bleeding into the work time that you have planned for them. So if they're playing video games and you have to get them to stop playing video games before they can start reading, if it gets challenging to get them off video games before you know it, you may have spent more time negotiating with them to get them off the game than you intended to, and now they have no time left for their reading before they have to go to swim practice or whatever it is. So if they work first and then they play, you take that piece out of the equation. And then scheduling academic activities for times when your child is not tired or hungry. That may seem obvious, but I think a lot of times when we get busy and our schedule gets tight, it can be easy to sort of just try and cram it in at a time when it's maybe not optimal for them. And then they're going to not be as focused as they would be otherwise, and maybe a lot more resistant than they would be otherwise. So you can make things easier and more effective by doing it at times when they're really kind of at their best and not needing something else. So keeping your child engaged in learning. So this is kind of has two benefits, right? One, it helps with consistency because they're going to be much more motivated to do the whatever activity or whatever kind of learning you had planned for them. So they may even start it on their own or do it without prompting. And when they're less resistant, it's also easier for you to encourage them to do it and kind of remind them and keep them on it. And then they'll also be retaining more because they're interested in what they're doing. And for kids with ADHD, I often talk about there being like an engagement threshold, kind of like a bar that they have to reach mentally, where for their brain to kind of click in and really be able to pay attention. When they haven't reached that engagement threshold and something is too boring for them, they kind of are just easily distracted. It's very hard for them to engage. It's very mentally effortful for them to do it. And then they don't retain anything and they find the whole thing very aversive, right? And don't want to do it again. So the more that you can keep things engaging for them, the more they're going to learn and the more often they're going to do it. So there's a variety of ways, right, that you can make things engaging for your kids. You can encourage interactive and hands-on activities that connect academic concepts to real life, right? So building simple science experiments, writing short stories, or creating art-based projects, building something with Legos that, is similar to something that they were learning about online. There's all sorts of ways that you can kind of build off of what they're interested in. When it comes to reading and writing, this is something that, depending on your child may actually be very interested in reading. I know some kids with ADHD where it's hard to get them to stop reading. Or you may have the opposite where your child is very resistant to reading and also to writing. So with this, you can keep them engaged by collaborating with them to set realistic daily reading and or writing goals. And then it doesn't always have to be, the very traditional books that we might think of that they have to be reading. You want them reading for, a good chunk of time, but you could also supplement some of that time with audiobooks. So they can either earn, like 10 minutes of audiobook time if they do 10 minutes of reading on certain days, or 20 minutes of reading, 10 minutes of audiobooks. But sometimes that can be a real motivator for kids. Graphic novels are also something that a lot of kids with ADHD or learning disorders gravitate toward and will read much more willingly than traditional books. And that's absolutely fine. I think sometimes parents feel like that's a cop-out or something, or not really reading enough. But if that's what your kid is willing to do, and they're willing to do it longer and in a way that's much more engaged than with traditional books, then that's absolutely fine. You can also do shared reading sessions, like with your child, where they read aloud to you, but you read every other page or every 2 pages, so that they're shared reading with them. And that can keep kids going a lot longer. It also, for kids that have issues with fluency, it can really help model for them what fluent reading sounds like. For kids that are really struggling with fluency, you can actually do it's called choral reading, where you and your child read together the same page at the same time, and then they can even try reading it alone after. And you can see this tremendous boost in their fluency that's pretty cool. And a lot of kids that struggle with reading actually really enjoy that. So those are just a few ideas there. There's also, just this idea of fun-based learning. So it doesn't always have to be so structured. You can, incorporate scavenger hunts or puzzles or board games that require reading. With my own kids, we actually really like Trivial Pursuit Family Edition, which has cards both for kids and then for adults. And my kids will read the cards to me, and these are challenging things to read. And sometimes, as the listener, it's hard enough to answer Trivial Pursuit question, but when you're not really sure of what they're sounding out, it adds another layer of challenge. But it's really fun, and it gets them reading, and they don't realize that they're actually doing work when they're doing it. You can have friendly competitions at home that involve either something specific related to learning, like who can, kind of write the best graphic novel themselves, or the funniest graphic novel, or whatever it is, or just friendly competitions around something that happens to also involve writing or reading, and don't even make that the focus of what you're doing. And then collaborative activities, right, where you work with your child together or your whole family on something that involves learning to make it more enjoyable and motivating. And then lastly, you can also have theme weeks, right, where you organize learning around weekly or daily themes. and use your child's interests and hobbies to personalize those themes, and then also involve your child in choosing the activities and format. And, some of these can feel overwhelming, if you think that you're going to try and do all of these things. So I think just pick a few of them to start with and kind of lay them out. And there are resources out there that can help you find different activities or ways to fill a theme week. I think often local libraries or museums have a lot of resources. I mean, they offer free summer reading programs, right, which often have weekly themes or suggestions and hands-on activities and even goals, that you can strive for over the summer with your reading for a certain number of books or pages. So the library, I think, is often like an underutilized resource, as are local museums. So that is where I always recommend that people start. And then online, there's also other options. There's a website called The Achievery, actually sponsored by AT&T, but they offer hundreds, if not thousands, of videos paired with interactive learning activities across a whole host of topics. And things are actually really well laid out, and the activities are really well described and are doable with just a lot of things often that you just have at home anyway. National Geographic Education website is a great resource. And there's also a website that called Science Sparks that I like a lot, that has easy to follow science experiments, but you need to often do those with your child. I don't think that they're things they can often do independently. But those are just a few starting places, but there's resources out there that can be really helpful. But just remember, that the more fun and interactive it is, the more your child will want to participate. All right, now let's talk a little bit more about motivation and tie that in with goal setting. So motivation, for kids with ADHD can be a struggle. Keeping things engaging is one way to keep kids motivated. Another way, in addition to the engagement piece, is with setting clear goals and pairing those goals with rewards. For a lot of kids, this is just an essential piece of the puzzle. But the goals really need to be short-term. So for some kids, that might mean a daily goal. For other kids, that might be a weekly goal, depending on what they can tolerate, or maybe even every 2 weeks. But you want to keep them short-term. And like I said, for many kids, it's a daily goal. You want to keep them realistic. So like I was saying before, if you have a kid who's a reluctant reader, setting a daily, and they're in, let's say, third grade, setting a daily goal of 30 minutes of reading every day might not be realistic because of the amount of pushback you're going to get, or the fact that they'll just peter out and not keep reading. So setting a shorter goal of 10 minutes a day, you'll actually end up further ahead, even though it seems like the goal might be too short. For a kid like that, that might be just right. And measurable. So you need to have a goal where you can say whether or not your child achieved it. Can you guys still hear me?
Yes, can hear you.
Okay, sorry, I just had a strange message come over my screen. Okay, sorry about that. So yes, so you have to make sure that they're measurable so that you can know if your child achieved it, so that you can pair it with a reward. So if it's simply like, just go work on your project right now, how will you know if they achieved it? Because they may go and work on it for 2 minutes and then say they met their goal. So you want to either have they want to get to a certain point in their project or a certain amount of time. Often amount of time or amount of pages completed is a great measurable goal. If you could track that progress in a visual way, so this works really well for things like if they're doing something on a math app, or if you have them reading every day, if you could have a visual way of tracking that progress, that can also be really motivating. And then pairing those goals with planned rewards. And I use the word planned here in bold because the kids need to know what the reward is they're working toward in order to stay motivated in the moment. They can remind themselves, this is hard, but I'm doing it, and it's going to also help me, work toward this reward that I want. And you can remind them of that. And because it also keeps you out of getting into a bribery hole, where your kid is whining about not wanting to do something, and then you're like, if you do this, I'll let you go on your, device for, an hour later. Just go do it. And then they kind of get in the cycle of wanting to have you use bribes to get them to do things in the future. So when you plan it out, you take all that negotiation and bribery out of the way. and they're more motivated because they can use it as something they keep in their mind as they work toward their goals. And then involve your child in setting the goals and choosing the rewards. So when they work on setting the goals, they'll have more buy-in. And when you help with choosing the rewards, you're making sure that the reward is actually something that they want. Because if you choose it and it's something they're not even that interested in and you didn't realize it, then they're not going to be that motivated by the reward. And praise is also a form of a reward. We don't often talk about it that way, but it's a positive reinforcer in our kind of behavioral psychology language. So anytime you can praise them for things like working hard, getting started on a task, staying on task, right? They're going to be more likely to do those things again. And then, of course, you can also praise them for their achievements, like when they meet one of their goals, right? Even if it's a small daily goal, provide them with praise. If it's a big weekly goal, provide them with praise, or when they complete their projects. The main thing is to kind of celebrate even those small behavioral wins, like getting started right away, and kind of making things visible through tracking and rewards that are planned out in way well ahead of time. All right. And now, after kind of talking through all the things you should do, which might feel hard to cram into the summer in the first place, I do also want to emphasize that balance is important, right? Summer should feel like summer. You don't want to burn yourself out or burn your kids out. You want to strike a balance between academics, family time, summer camp, and downtime. You want kids to be able to go back into the school year feeling refreshed, not feeling burned out, and ready to start the school year again. So you want to avoid overwhelming your child with too many demands. And one way to do this is through those visual schedules and by having some of those more basic things repeat throughout the week. Because if they can look at a schedule themselves and know that this is the time when I need to do my reading, and it happens at that time at least 3 days a week, it will become more automatic, and then you no longer need to demand something of them. You no longer need to say, go do your reading. Why aren't you doing your reading? Start your reading now, right? It becomes more and more kind of commands and demands of them, which can just feel overwhelming. So the more you can make things routine, the fewer kind of demands you're putting on your child. The more you can make learning feel enjoyable and a part of daily life, the more it feels, less it feels like a demand, and the more it just feels like fun or routine. And when have kids that are going to camp all day, and it can feel hard to squeeze in that academic time, just adding those short academic routines to longer camp days can be helpful. And then when you need to get in those longer stretches of learning to supplement kind of those 10 to 30 minute chunks, consider tutoring sessions for those longer periods of time, so that the pressure is taken off of you as the parent. You're not the one kind of on them trying to teach them and trying to get them to stay engaged for that long period of time. You've got somebody where that's their job, right? They know how to do it. You've got somebody who can bond with your child, and your child will be looking forward to seeing, and it takes the pressure off of you to do that. And then give your child breaks, either week-long breaks when you truly take a vacation, or even just a couple of days off a week where you're just not thinking about learning. They're just, living life, not thinking about what they need to do academically. All right, let's talk about a couple of kind of case spotlights here, where we've got some real-world examples of how all of this can fit together for kids. These kids are both later or middle elementary school age, but a lot of things will apply across a variety of ages. So let's look at Ethan first. He is 9 years old, and he loves Minecraft. So left to his own devices, he would play all day long. But his parents, wanted to avoid a total summer brain drain. But they, had the challenge of figuring out how to motivate a kid who has no interest in doing anything academic over the summer whatsoever. So the first step in this case, and I recommend this for all parents, is that Ethan's parents on their own, decided how many tutoring sessions he would have each week, the maximum amount of daily Minecraft time that he would be allowed, and the amount of time that they would expect him to spend, each day on kind of independent academic activities, like, working on a math app, or, reading independently. So that all gets decided ahead of time. So setting aside time even for thinking that through yourself or with your co-parent, setting aside time for thinking that through and thinking through what a plan might look like is important, because if you don't take that first step and make room for the planning, then nothing else can fall into place. Then with step 2, his parents involved Ethan, right? And now this is where you can start collaborating with your child, and this helps with getting their buy-in to co-create a visual weekly schedule on a whiteboard. And you can get your child involved in this even by either doing some of the writing themselves on the board too, or some kids really get into like decorating their board and some whole thing. But involving them and getting their buy-in early on what that schedule might look like for them. So in this case, so Ethan isn't a kid who goes to camp all day, so there's a bit more flexibility throughout the day. But 2 days a week, he's got 45 minutes of tutoring, right, in math or reading. And that really kind of right there just sort of takes up a chunk where, as a parent, you could feel some relief and say, okay, if nothing else, we've got this covered. We've got these 2 chunks of time during the week where this is going to happen, and we're going to kind of, put some sort of like structure and backbones around this right there. And then throughout the week, his daily routine is wake up at a set wake up time, have his breakfast, and then do 20 minutes of reading. On his tutoring is on there on the marked days on the visual schedule. And after that's done, then he can play Minecraft. And his parents decided on 40 minutes there. After that, he can go play outside or play with friends or siblings. Then he does his math app or math game before going to swim team practice, and then his kind of evening routine and dinner kicks in after that. And then and Ethan's parents, at least in theory, implement the routine and rules absolutely consistently, but they're able to implement it quite consistently because everything's been laid out and was planful, and because Ethan's buy-in is there, which makes it a lot easier. And then let's look at some strategies that were used to keep Ethan engaged in learning. So for a project-based learning standpoint, one activity that he came up with was building a mini cardboard arcade. He found something online, like instructions online that allowed him to do this. And his parents encouraged him to show his tutor the measurements that he was using to do it and everything that he was mapping out in session. And things like that can really be nice because it can build engagement around the tutoring and help build some relationships there as well. For reading, Ethan prefers to read Minecraft graphic novels to traditional books, and that's fine. His parents are okay with that as long as he's reading for his 20 minutes every day. For math, one thing is that Ethan likes to cook and bake, and so once a week he does that with his parents. He measures the ingredients, and his parents have him double recipes often, and so with that he has to use some of his math skills to figure out what the ingredients measurements should be. In terms of executive functioning, his parents actually also set it up that before he could play Minecraft, it's his job to organize his desk and pack his swim bag for swim team later. And both of those things happen daily before he can play Minecraft. And he's kind of motivated to get them done so he can get onto Minecraft. And for him, in terms of rewards, because he's so resistant to academic work, and tutoring, each tutoring session that's completed without complaints earns Ethan points toward a Lego set. And that goes a long way in reducing his resistance. And over time, he just actually is fine with going to tutoring sessions. He still earns his points, but it just becomes part of his routine. Resistance goes way down. And then also completing 10 questions on his math app earns 5 bonus Minecraft minutes for him on a daily basis. And what's nice about the way that they laid out the schedule was they gave him 40 minutes of Minecraft minutes, but of Minecraft time. But they would actually in the summer be okay with him playing Minecraft for up to an hour. But they set it lower so that they had some room to add additional minutes as rewards as needed, and they could add additional Minecraft time rewards in throughout the summer if they needed to. Whereas if they started at the full hour, that's kind of where they max out on their comfort level of him playing Minecraft. So they don't really have room to go up and add additional time as rewards. So if you can keep it a little bit lower than your maximum, it gives you some of that flexibility to still use screen time as a reward for your child. All right, now let's look at Maya. So Maya is 11 years old, and she does go to all-day camp. So she's at camp from 8:30 to 3:30, and she loves it, super enthusiastic about it. But when she gets home, she just crashes and wants to just watch YouTube on the couch when she comes home, and would probably do that all evening if somebody didn't stop her. So Maya's parents, again, took a step back, made a plan, decided on independently, what her weekly tutoring schedule would be, the amount of time she spends on independent activities, and the amount of daily screen time that she's allowed. And then they loop her in, right? So with her help, they draft a color-coded weekly planner. And since she's at camp all day and doesn't get home till a little after 3:30, they scheduled her tutoring for 5 o'clock to 5:45. So she has a little bit of time to unwind when she gets home. She can have some snacks. She can, kind of do whatever she wants. She's not on screens during that time, though. They took that away at that time, before she can kind of re-energize and get in her tutoring time. And after that, she has dinner. Then she's allowed 30 minutes of screen time where she can go on YouTube or whatever she's allowed to do. And then from 7 to 8, she has more free time, but it's screen free, so it doesn't interfere with her bedtime. At 8 o'clock, she does 20 minutes of reading to kind of start to wrap up the day before moving on to her bedtime routine, which can take anywhere from like 20 to 40 minutes, depending on how things are going. So in this case, she's getting her tutoring in the evening. She's getting in 20 minutes of reading before bed. And then her parents also, build in some other more experience-based hands-on learning throughout the week as well, which we'll talk about here on the next slide. So for Maya's project, she opted to create a digital scrapbook of camp activities and friends with captions throughout the scrapbook, and then also a weekly journal entry. So that gets her writing. And she likes to show it to her parents. So she likes for her parents to read the journal entry. It's not something that's essential. You can also have kids who kind of write their own thing. Maybe they show you the number of pages they wrote, but if it's something they want to write just for themselves, that's okay too. For reading, she likes to read adventure novels before bed, and the family often goes about 2 hours away on weekends, and she spends at least part of that time reading. And she gets into her books, so it ends up working out really well. And cumulatively, that adds a lot of reading minutes over the summer, reading on those car rides. And then on Sundays, her family has a tradition where they have a read and relax hour, where the kids can do anything that's screen free, but the parents also are reading during that time, and it kind of just encourages everybody to read rather than choosing something else to do. But some kids in the family prefer to draw and things like that during that time, and that's okay too. So for math, Maya has a smartwatch device, and she tracks her daily step counts on there and then graphs her progress. So she really enjoys doing that. It gets her kind of using math and graphing and all that fun stuff. For executive functioning, she uses a one-page evening routine card that just lists out what she needs to do: shower, brush her teeth, lay out her camp gear, and that just boosts really her independence at bedtime and gets her parents, kind of out of that nagging mode and reduces a lot of conflict around bedtime. For her rewards, each daily reading session that she starts on time with one or fewer reminders earns her 5 bonus minutes of screen time the next day. So again, this is a situation where her parents picked below what they would consider her maximum screen time, or the maximum screen time to tolerate, which gives them the flexibility of adding in bonus minutes as rewards later on. All right. So let's just talk about some key takeaways here, things that I'll hope you remember, as you think ahead to this summer and the things that your own child will need and what your own plan might look like. So above all, like planning, consistency, and collaboration with your child can go a long way in minimizing summer learning loss. And that planning stuff, I think, is essential and something that can be really hard, I think, for parents being so busy these days to really stop and make the time for. But carving that out early, like sometime in the next few weeks, to start making a plan, laying out what that might look like, is essential. And that's the first step to really setting yourself and your child up for success this summer. Positive reinforcement and encouragement and praise are also essential. We talked a lot about things that will keep your child engaged in learning, but that praise piece, and even beyond praise, just like your own engagement with your child around this, like showing interest in what they're doing, interest in what they're learning, just even being near them when they're doing their activities and noticing them, I guess, as much as praising them in those moments can go a long way in keeping them engaged and more likely to do it again, the next day without resistance. Tutoring can be tremendously helpful in preventing summer learning loss and gives you those kind of pillars of time throughout the week where nothing's going to interfere. We're going to do this. It's going to get done. And you get those extended learning periods. And it reduces the burden on parents because you're not responsible for your child learning during that time. The tutor's responsible during that time. And they're really an expert at this. So you just know that they're in good hands and you can kind of take a breather and know that that piece of the job is done for the day. And then lastly, really do strive for balance. And remember to enjoy time together as a family over the summer. You only get so many summers with your kids, and so you want to make sure that your kids and you enjoy that time together as a family. All right. Well, thank you all so much for being here, and I'm happy to answer questions that anyone might have for me.
Thank you, Dr. Rooney. We do have a few questions. Let's dive right in. One parent asked about how soon should I start mapping out summer activities and what resources or suggestions can I follow in sort of tackling that?
Yeah, so I think the sooner the better, right? Setting aside that time to start making a plan and starting really with what the routine is and with what some of those backbones are going to be, like how much time do we need each day for learning, and then how many maybe interactive projects or theme weeks do we want to do, and what's realistic for that. Starting with that now is ideal because then you can start to fill in some of those blanks in the coming weeks around like what should the theme weeks be, what kinds of projects should my kid be doing, and then in terms of resources, there are some websites that has like kind of toolkits for parents and for planning out summer learning and theme weeks. There's a website actually called summerlearning.org that has a parent toolkit on it, which is really just some different resources. There's actually a book that they've put out on how to keep your kids learning when schools are closed. It was more focused on COVID times, but applies really well to summer learning and planning those things out. And then there's a national NWEA, I can't remember what that stands for. It's an educational organization that has resources on there as well for parents to promote summer learning. And there's also a website called Prepared Parents that has these things called unboxed learning kits. And they're kind of these comprehensive digital kits where you can pick a topic around project-based learning, and that sort of gives you all the information you need and links to digital content to sort of make, I guess, some of these more engaged, interactive learning things more feasible for you to do at home with your child.
Great. Let's dive into this next question. At what age should I involve my child in planning learning goals for the summer? In this case, this parent has two kids, one in elementary school and one who's almost finished with middle school.
Yeah, so as young as possible, really. And what you don't want to engage them in conversations around some of those things that you think are essential, like what's the maximum amount of time you would allow them on screens, or what's the kind of minimum amount of time you feel like they need to read each day, or how many times a week they need to do that. Those are things you kind of want to at least have some ideas around the parameters you want for that before you start having conversation with them. But where you can start engaging them is like, maybe what's the order that some of these things are going to go in? Like, yes, first you want to work, then you want to play, but does this happen in the morning? Does it happen in the evening? Are there other things they do first before they start doing their reading? You can help them. They can get involved in that way. So giving them kind of like 6 choice options in some ways, not just starting with an open slate and letting them go from there. And then when it comes to matching things to their interests and having them help come up with some ideas around projects, I think that's where they can get really creative, and really you can start to get a lot of buy-in from them. So starting younger with that is better. Sometimes it's even easier with the younger kids than with the older kids.
Okay. Flip the script a little bit, right? In these other previous questions, we assume the kids are interested in following these summer learning programs. But what if you have a teenager or a high schooler who doesn't want their parents to plan anything? What are some tips or suggestions maybe that a parent can use to at least help maybe guide their child to build their own plan? Because they're certainly at that age where they could probably start to do that a little bit.
Yeah. So I think starting with kids like that, starting with tutoring, honestly, is one of the best ways to go, because you're making it mandatory. This is something that they have to do in order to have other privileges. I mean, you want to be able to kind of just reward them for doing the tutoring, but one of the ways to do that is by saying that certain things are privilege, and you have access to those privileges when you do what you need to do, and tutoring is one of those things. And if they do it well and they do it without complaining, then maybe they can even get some extra privileges. But starting there, where that's like a non-negotiable. And then you can think of, is there anything else that's non-negotiable? Or are there ways to sort of get them engaged without letting them know that you're really engaging them? It depends on the kid, to be honest. Like, some kids will get engaged if you sort of say things like, hey, we're going to be going on a trip this summer, and we want everyone in the family to sort of plan out. This is assuming you don't have 10 kids. But if you have like 2 kids, everyone in the family to plan out, like one of the days and what we're going to go see and do. And so you do your research and figure out, what we were going to do on your day. And before you know it, they're like online looking stuff up about this place that you're going to. They're reading about it. They're thinking about what you could do during that day, laying it out, presenting it to you. You could have them present it to you in a PowerPoint if you wanted to. And you're kind of getting them engaged that way without saying it like you're actually having them do something that involves learning, right? So I think those are some of the ways to go, but outsourcing it, and making the tutoring mandatory is probably one of the easiest ways to do it with kids at that age.
Excellent. Let's take one more question, then I'm just going to ask you for some closing thoughts. I know you put together your key takeaways, but just a couple of closing thoughts. And this question is, what are some ways I can positively reinforce my child with their learning during the summer? And I know you talked about that as one of the important things that parents need to do, but how should parents go about doing that? Obviously you don't want to be over the top, right? What are some suggestions or thoughts there as far as positively reinforcing a child?
Yeah. So with kids with ADHD in particular, one of the things that can be hard for them is delayed gratification. So when you're talking about positive reinforcement in terms of rewards, the delayed gratification piece means that you need to have shorter term rewards. And the shorter term rewards can be things like having a chart up where they earn points on a daily basis, or for completing a certain thing each day, and then they earn points toward that. And those points might go toward a weekly reward, right? So the points serve as a placeholder for what they're getting at the end of the week. For some even younger kids, waiting until the end of the week to get the reward sometimes could even be hard. And so that's where having a daily reward, often parents will use screens for that. Other parents or families, I've seen them use like their kids can earn Lego pieces toward a smaller Lego build that they want to be able to work on. So you can earn a few Lego pieces that they pick out at the end of each day. Some parents are given like minifigures, and they can get a different minifigure at the end of each day. But you want to keep it really small and tangible in some way to them. Another form of positive reinforcement, as I mentioned, is praise. And for some kids, praise alone is enough to keep them motivated. And it doesn't have to be over the top praise. You just want to notice what they're doing, and you want to be specific about it. So, wow, you really got started on that right away today. Wow, you kept reading all the way right up until that timer went off, and you didn't stop once. Or great job, finishing your, math today. That was awesome. And for a lot of kids, that even is enough. Another form of positive reinforcement is attention or like engagement on your part as a parent. So it doesn't even have to be praise. It can just be noticing, like, oh, I see that you're, drawing a picture of what you saw in that book yesterday. That's pretty cool. Like just being engaged that way, or doing something with them. Like you can do it together. We talked about some of those joint strategies earlier, and that sharing attention with them is also a form of positive reinforcement. So those are just a few different ways to kind of think about that.
No, that's excellent. And then for parents, as we wrap things up today, for parents who got to get all this planning done, a couple of thoughts, maybe some words of motivation, encouragement, because it certainly is a lot of work. What would you like to share with them as they kind of get ready to plan out their summer activities and things like that?
Yeah, so I think it is work, right, to do it up front, and that's why I kind of emphasize the need to do it, because it can be something that's very easy to put off and procrastinate on, especially when it's not something that's kind of pressing down on you as it needs to be done by tomorrow. But by doing this now and by carving out that time to make a plan, you are actually taking the burden off of yourself later. You're going to make everything so much easier, and you're going to be able to feel really good as summer's going on that your child is doing what you would hope they would do, right? They are getting in some of that academic stuff every day, just like you'd hope. You kind of have this vision becoming a reality, and you're feeling, okay, I don't need to worry. Like my kid's doing what they need to do. They're not going to have as much of a slide or regression. My kid's feeling good about it because we're doing what we said we were going to do. And it's a relief almost, right, when it's happening, because you made that plan ahead of time. And you don't need to make the plan all at once. I think you can start just by carving out 15 minutes maybe, right, to start thinking it through, mapping some things out, and then plan your next 15-minute chunk when you're going to set aside some time to take the next step. And then it can sort of start to build on itself a bit. Or you can sit down and try and do it all in, 1 hour sitting kind of thing to get the ball rolling. But I think any time you invest now in this is only going to be like time and stress that you're saving yourself from later. So yeah, I would just strongly encourage you to kind of get started on it and reap the benefits once summer starts.
Excellent. Well, that's great advice. Dr. Rooney, thank you so much. This has been really insightful and really informative. Really appreciate all of your presentation today.
Wonderful. Thank you, Michael.
Yeah. And this concludes our presentation. I do want you to know that we have been recording this event, and so you'll look for an email from us in about a day or two with a link to the on-demand if you're things you want to go back and look at. And the website is there on your screen, huntingtonhelps.com/webinars. That's all of our past events as well as our upcoming events. You can grab all that information. We'll also try to include in that email follow-up the link to the ADHD blog that Dr. Rooney contributes to. There's a lot of great resources and information there, so I highly encourage you to check that out. Go to the website, look at it, and if you have questions, let us know. But that concludes today's presentation. Really appreciate you making the time. On behalf of Dr. Rooney and Huntington Learning Center, I want to say thank you and look forward to seeing you at our next event.